My name is Ethan Dre. I'm 50 years old, and until recently I was the senior systems architect at Veltria Housing, a position I held for nearly 2 decades, 18 years to be exact. That's almost half my life dedicated to one company, one mission, one belief that what we were building mattered. When I joined Veltria back in 2007, the company was still finding its feet. Just a few of us cramped into a tiny office in Mississauga with outdated laptops, patchy internet, and even patchier funding. But there was something about the vision, about using technology to make housing more accessible and more efficient, that pulled me in. I wasn't just the first IT hire, I was the whole department. From setting up routers to writing the very first back-end scripts that managed tenant databases and payment systems, I did it all. I laid the digital foundation of what would later become one of the most recognized names in housing infrastructure in the country. Over the years, as Veltria grew, so did my role. I transitioned from hands-on coding to architecting full-scale systems, billing platforms, internal portals, logistics, integrations, disaster recovery protocols. My fingerprints were on everything. And I didn't just build systems, I built a culture. I mentored junior engineers, trained managers on tech basics, and developed internal playbooks that are still in use today. That's why I didn't see it coming. It was a Thursday. Rainy. Typical Toronto spring. I was called into a meeting. HR and our new CTO, Graham Lewin, were already on the call. Graham didn't waste time. He had a sheet in front of him, probably something a consultant had whipped up. "Ethan," he said, "this isn't personal. It's a strategic realignment. Your role is being eliminated effective immediately." I blinked, thought I'd misheard. 18 years and I was being dismissed like I just spilled coffee on someone's keyboard. I asked, "That's it, after all this time?" He shifted awkwardly. "You've done great work, but with current salary benchmarks and overlapping responsibilities in the department, we believe we can manage your functions with a team approach moving forward." Translation: I cost too much, and they thought I was replaceable. No exit strategy, no transition plan. Just a few weeks of severance and a generic letter thanking me for my contributions. What hurt wasn't just the layoff. It was how sterile and transactional it all felt. Like I was never more than a line item in a budget. They didn't see me. They didn't remember that I was the one who kept the servers alive during that massive power outage in 2012. Or that I personally stopped a ransomware attack that could have compromised over 200,000 tenant records. Or that I once worked 36 hours straight to patch a critical flaw during a platform migration. To them, I was just high-cost legacy infrastructure. After I left, there were issues, of course. System errors I'd warned about. Integration bugs no one else knew how to fix. Graham actually reached out a couple of times with quick questions. I stared at his emails, thinking of the countless nights I gave to that company. But I didn't respond. I wasn't being petty. I was drawing a boundary. For the first time in 18 years, I wasn't responsible for putting out their fires. At first, the silence was crushing. I didn't know who I was without Veltria. I'd missed birthdays, anniversaries, even my father's last hospital visit because I thought my loyalty mattered. That I'd be remembered. I thought wrong, but now I'm building something new. Consulting for startups who want more than just flashy tech, they want sustainable systems. Systems that last. I bring 2 decades of real-world experience, and I no longer let anyone tell me I'm too expensive when I'm the reason half their platform stays online. I still think about Veltria sometimes, about the team, the engineers I mentored, the legacy I left in their codebase. But I don't miss the company. Not anymore. I gave them the best years of my professional life, and they repaid me with a spreadsheet and a handshake. But that's okay, because here's what I've learned. Loyalty is only valuable when it's mutual, and respect, that should never have to be earned twice. After I left Veltria, there was this eerie stillness. No more Slack pings at 2 a.m. No one calling to ask why the billing dashboard was lagging. But I knew it wouldn't stay quiet for long. Roughly 3 weeks after I walked out of the glass doors for the last time, I got a LinkedIn notification. "Welcome Leanne and Devansh to the Veltria Tech Team, 2 hires." One title, Co-Systems Analysts. I clicked on both profiles. Recent grads. No previous enterprise infrastructure experience. No deep cloud architecture background. Leanne had worked on a couple of mobile apps. Devansh was fresh off a DevOps internship. And that's when it hit me, they didn't just replace me, they tried to split me in half. I wasn't even angry. Not at first. Just sad. Sad because I'd spent 18 years designing a house with hidden doors, secret wiring, custom plumbing, metaphorically speaking. And now 2 people with blueprints drawn on napkins were handed the keys and told, "Figure it out." The system I built wasn't flashy, But it was layered years of patches, edge case fixes, emergency workarounds, legacy to modern migrations. I'd documented as much as I could over the years, sure, but there were always parts that lived only in my head. Little quirks I'd never gotten around to formalizing. A security routine that only triggered under specific usage spikes. A redundant failover protocol hidden deep in the API gateway. A month later, I heard from Javier, one of the last engineers I truly trusted at Veltria. He messaged me one night. "Hey, sorry to bother you, but do you remember the reason we set the auto-scaling threshold to 72% on the container clusters? Leanne and Devonsh are trying to reset it to 85% and it's crashing the load balancer." I laughed. Not out of spite, more like disbelief. I had documented it, actually, in a note titled "Read this before you touch the cluster," stored inside our internal Confluence. Guess they skipped that part. I didn't reply to Javier. I wanted to God knows I did. But helping now would only validate what Veltria had done. They didn't value me. They valued a version of me they could pay less. So they got it. Word started getting around. The tenant portal went down during a weekend payment cycle. Thousands of rental payments failed to process, and angry tenants were flooding the support line. That same week, system access was accidentally revoked for 3 regional property managers. Internal logins wiped. HR had to scramble with printed paper rosters, printed paper, in 2025. A few of my former team members texted me. Most were careful not to mention the new hires directly, but the tone was always the same: regret, frustration, exhaustion. I found out later they were trying to reverse engineer parts of the backend I wrote in 2013. Why? Because they didn't fully understand the modular updates I'd built on top of it. And why would they? The system was never meant to be learned overnight, or by skimming documentation like it was a Reddit thread. But the real kicker: Graham, the same CTO who'd smiled while handing me my severance, started poking around my GitHub. I noticed because I still had analytics enabled on one of my archived Veltria side projects. Suddenly I was getting hit with views from Toronto, Ontario, tagged under a corporate VPN IP range. He was looking for breadcrumbs. At some point they started pulling up my old Jira tickets, reopening them. There was even an internal thread titled, "Reassessing Ethan's Automation Layer." Someone forwarded it to me anonymously. The comments were brutal, equal parts confused and passive-aggressive. Why did he build it like this? Is there any way to simplify this logic tree? Can we just start from scratch? Let them try. You see, I didn't make the system complicated for fun. I made it resilient, flexible, scalable. It had to be because Veltria kept changing direction every 6 months. One year we were a property tech firm, the next we were dabbling in AI-powered housing analytics. Every pivot I adapted, quietly, reliably. And now they were treating that resilience like an inconvenience, like I'd been too smart for my own good. Here's the irony: I used to worry that if I ever left, the system would collapse. That I'd be dooming the company. That's partly why I stayed for so long: guilt. But seeing them struggle, watching them patch things with duct tape and interns, I realized something freeing. It was never my job to carry them. My job was to build something great, and I did. Whether they knew how to maintain it was never my responsibility. One night, I got another email from Graham. Short and desperate: "Hey Ethan, would you consider coming back on a short-term contract just to help stabilize some things?" I didn't reply. Instead, I poured myself a drink, sat on my balcony, watched the city lights flicker and hum. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't tethered to a system or a crisis or a company that saw me as expendable. They thought they could replace me with 2 people and a notebook. Turns out you can't outsource experience. My name wasn't on a single wall at Veltria. No plaque, no framed Employee of the Year photo, no hallway portrait. 18 years of sweat and systems, and not once did I ask for a spotlight. Truth is, I never needed recognition. Not really. I was the guy who kept the wheels turning, not the one who stood at the podium. I was the one fixing a broken server from a hotel room on vacation, debugging a crashing API in the middle of my father's funeral week. Yes, that actually happened. I did it because I believed in the mission. I believed in us. But what I didn't realize back then was this loyalty without respect is just servitude. It took walking away and watching them stumble without me for that to finally click. See, after Graham's half-hearted attempt to bring me back, the tone of the outreach changed. He followed up again a week later, this time through his executive assistant. "Hi Ethan, just wondering if you might consider a limited engagement consulting only, of course. Flexible hours. Generous rate. Please let us know what works for you. No apology, no ownership, just a bribe cloaked in politeness. I ignored it. They didn't want me, they wanted a fix. They wanted to lift the hood and have me explain which wires not to cut. I wasn't about to give them that satisfaction. Then came the kicker. One morning I got an email from the new CEO. Not Graham. A guy named Lucas Carr. I'd met him once briefly in a board meeting 5 years earlier. Back then, he was a strategic consultant full of buzzwords and aggressive timelines. Now he was in charge. His email was longer, carefully worded. He'd heard about my departure and deeply regretted the loss of someone with such historic insight. He invited me to lunch. Just a chat, he said. No pressure. I didn't reply immediately. I let it sit in my inbox like a fish eyeing a lure. But eventually, curiosity got the better of me. Not because I was interested in coming back, but because I wanted to look the man in the eye and see if he even understood what he was asking. So I met him. We sat at a minimalist bistro downtown, all white tiles and silent servers. Lucas was charming, practiced. The kind of guy who used phrases like cross-functional synergy without irony. I've heard nothing but respect for your work, he said, dabbing the corner of his mouth with a napkin. People still reference your DevOps playbooks. I smiled politely. Is that so? He leaned in, voice softer. We'd love to bring you back in an advisory role. You wouldn't be alone. You'd guide the new team. Just help us rebuild some of the institutional knowledge that frankly walked out the door when you did. There it was. The truth behind the invitation. Not about honoring my contribution, just recovering lost ground. I sat back and asked, why should I come back? Lucas blinked. Excuse me. Why, I repeated, should I return to a company that treated me like an old engine part? You replaced me without a second thought. You gave my life's work to 2 juniors with shiny resumes. And now that the machine's broken, you want the original mechanic. Lucas's jaw tightened. I can't speak for decisions made before I stepped in. Maybe not, I said. But you're living with them now. He tried to salvage the conversation, offered an absurd consulting rate, even hinted at a potential VP title, technical legacy officer, or something equally invented. I listened. Then I stood up, shook his hand, and walked out. Because what I realized in that moment, what every builder, every quiet contributor, every overlooked genius eventually has to face is this: being indispensable doesn't mean they'll keep you. It just means they'll panic when you're gone. And panic they did. Over the next 2 months, I watched from the sidelines as Veltria scrambled. Their tenant app remained buggy. Internal integrations kept failing. One of their main regional servers went down for 9 hours because someone forgot to renew the SSL cert, something I'd automated 5 years ago. I should have felt smug. Part of me did. But deeper than that was something else: validation. For so long, I doubted myself. Wondered if I was being petty or dramatic or overattached. But no. I was just human. A human who gave his best years to a machine that didn't even say thank you when he unplugged himself. What I craved wasn't applause. It was acknowledgement. A simple, honest statement: you mattered. You made us better. And now I had that not in words, but in absence. In their errors. In their desperate emails and LinkedIn posts. I mattered. I made them better. They just didn't know it until I was gone. I don't tell this story for sympathy. I tell it for the other Ethans out there, the quiet workhorses. The infrastructure minds, the ones who don't chase titles, but chase excellence. If that's you, listen closely. Don't wait until you're fired to recognize your own worth. Don't mistake silence for appreciation. Don't assume that just because the wheels are turning, the company understands who's pedaling. Respect isn't just about recognition. It's about how they treat you before the ship starts sinking. I walked out of that lunch meeting lighter. Not because I had a new gig lined up or some grand exit plan, but because I finally understood I never needed Veltria to recognize me. I just needed to stop giving my loyalty to people who didn't. My name's Ethan Dre, and by the time Veltria came knocking for the 3rd time, I had already moved on. I wasn't bitter anymore. I wasn't even angry. I had reached that rare, quiet place where disappointment becomes distance, and the weight of the past no longer drags behind you like a rusted chain. I had started freelancing small contracts, nothing flashy. Helping mid-sized firms modernize their architecture. I got to be hands-on again. I got to build again. And most of all, I got to choose who I worked with. That's when I got the message from Graham. Not his assistant, not Lucas, not some HR ghostwriter signing off a generic "we miss you" note. Graham himself. His email was short, no subject line, just, "Ethan, I owe you a real conversation. No offers, no strings, just a coffee and some honesty. You pick the place." Gee, at first I thought about deleting it. This was the same man who let me walk without a conversation. The same CTO who replaced me with 2 junior engineers because, as he put it, the company needs fresh energy. The man who didn't even send a farewell email, let alone a thank you. But a strange thing happened. I hesitated. Not because I wanted closure, I'd already found that on my own. I hesitated because a part of me wondered, was he finally ready to admit it? We met on a rainy Wednesday afternoon in a corner cafe far from Veltria's downtown tower. I got there first half expecting him not to show. But 10 minutes later, there he was, slightly heavier, slower on his feet, with streaks of gray creeping into his beard. He looked tired. "Hey, Ethan," he said, offering a hand. I shook it quietly. We sat in silence for a few seconds. He ordered a black coffee. I stuck to tea. Then, to my surprise, Graham leaned forward, looked me square in the eyes, and said, "I screwed up. Not we, not the company, just I. I mishandled everything," he continued. "Your departure. The replacement. The way we dismissed what you'd built. I let the board pressure me into quick changes. Thought I could modernize the department by bringing in younger faces, newer tools. I convinced myself we could rebuild what you had created from scratch." I didn't speak, just listened. "You know the worst part," he said. "I didn't even realize what we lost until the system started breaking. And even then I blamed the tools, the processes, anything but myself. But the truth is, we lost our foundation the moment you walked out." There it was, the apology I never thought I'd hear. He didn't offer me a job. He didn't try to pitch a comeback. He just sat across from me, finally aware of what he'd allowed to slip through his fingers. I could have unloaded on him. Could have listed every slight, every oversight, every weekend I worked while he played golf. But I didn't. I had nothing left to prove. No bitterness left to burn. "You know," I said finally, "I didn't leave because I was angry. I left because I was invisible." He nodded slowly, eyes down. "You told me once that loyalty is about showing up," I continued. "Well, I showed up for 18 years. I solved problems no one else understood. I trained 3 generations of engineers. I held the back end together with duct tape and code. And when the day came that I needed someone to speak up for me, no one did." He looked up then, and for the first time I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years: remorse. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "And I know I can't rewrite the past. But I wanted to say it out loud. You deserved better." I nodded. "I know." We sat there in silence for a few minutes, rain tapping the windows. Then Graham stood up, dropped a 20 on the table, and said, "Thanks for meeting me." I didn't stop him when he left. I stayed behind for a while, sipping the last of my tea, letting it all settle. The apology hadn't changed the past, but it had done something I didn't expect. It had closed the loop. Not because I needed his validation, but because he needed to say it, and I needed to hear it. I left the cafe lighter than I arrived. And as I walked down the wet sidewalk, I realized something else. Respect doesn't always come when you want it, but sometimes it finds you when you've already found yourself. Veltria eventually stabilized. They hired a new DevOps director. Rebuilt parts of the stack I'd once crafted from scratch. They're not the company I built, nor should they be. They're something else now. And that's okay. As for me, I didn't go back. Never even entertained the idea. But I did get an email from one of the junior engineers who replaced me. She wrote, "I've been studying your old architecture. I'm amazed by how elegant it is. I hope I can build something half as stable one day. Thank you for leaving such a clear footprint. Mira." That meant more to me than any title, any salary, any last-minute counteroffer. Because it wasn't about nostalgia or regret, it was about legacy. Not a legacy built on applause, but on quiet mastery. On showing up. On doing the job right when no one's watching. So, no, Ethan Dre's name was never printed on Veltria's walls. But in every line of code still running today, in every process they still use because it just works, my fingerprints remain. That's the kind of recognition no one can take away. I'm Ethan Dre. By now you've heard about the years I spent building Veltria's backend, the late nights, the fights with the system, the eventual dismissal, and that long-awaited apology from Graham. What you haven't heard is what came after. After the cafe meeting with Graham, I realized something important. Veltria was no longer my home. It hadn't been for a while. But more than that, I saw clearly how I'd been defining myself for years, by the company I worked for, the projects I managed, the legacy I left behind. And that was the problem. Because when you tie your worth so tightly to a place or a title, you forget who you are outside of it. So I took a step back. I sold my condo downtown, packed up my life, and moved to a smaller city a few hours away. Somewhere quieter. Somewhere that didn't carry the echoes of Veltria's glass towers or the hum of its server rooms. somewhere I could think. I started by freelancing. At first, just small gigs helping local businesses upgrade their IT infrastructure, building websites for startups, mentoring a handful of young engineers eager to learn. It was humbling. I was no longer the guy who had all the answers. I had to rebuild my confidence from the ground up. But that's where the magic happened. Freelancing gave me freedom. I got to pick projects that excited me, that challenged me in new ways. I worked with nonprofits, local artisans, and community groups. For the first time in a long time, I saw technology not as a corporate machine, but as a tool to help real people solve real problems. I also started volunteering. I joined a tech mentorship program aimed at underrepresented youth. Watching those kids discover coding for the first time, seeing their eyes light up when they finally cracked a tough problem, it reminded me why I got into this field in the first place. Not for prestige, not for a paycheck, but for the joy of creating learning and sharing knowledge. One particular project stands out. A small charity focused on mental health approached me with a challenge. They needed a secure, user-friendly platform where people could anonymously share their stories and access resources. It wasn't about flashy features or viral growth, it was about trust and safety. I spent months designing and coding that platform from scratch, making sure every line of code respected users' privacy and dignity. When it launched, the feedback was overwhelming. People thanked us for giving them a safe space, a place to be heard without judgment. That project reminded me that my skills could make a difference beyond the boardrooms and quarterly reports. That my work could have meaning, not just metrics. Around that time, I also started thinking about writing. I'd kept a journal for years, chronicling not just technical notes, but thoughts about leadership, failure, and resilience. One evening, after a particularly inspiring mentorship session, I decided to turn those reflections into blog posts. I shared stories about the mistakes I'd made, the lessons I'd learned, and the people who'd influenced me. I wrote about loyalty not as blind allegiance, but as a commitment to values, to integrity, to growth. The blog slowly gained traction. Other engineers, managers, even CEOs started reaching out. Some wanted advice. Others simply wanted to say, "Thanks for being honest." That honesty changed something inside me. It connected me to a community that valued transparency over ego, collaboration over competition. In time, I was invited to speak at conferences and workshops. Not as a representative of Veltria or some tech giant, but as Ethan Dre, a man who'd weathered the highs and lows of a long career and come out with stories worth telling. Standing on those stages, I realized how far I'd come. From being overlooked and undervalued, I had become a mentor, an advocate, a thought leader. Not because I clawed my way back to a corner office, but because I embraced vulnerability and authenticity. One day, a former Veltria colleague reached out. "I read your blog," she said. "It's changed how I think about leadership. Would you be interested in consulting with my new startup?" That led to a new chapter, helping startups build ethical, scalable systems from the ground up, guiding founders to prioritize people over profits, teaching engineers to find pride not just in code, but in culture. And all the while, I kept that quiet promise to myself to never lose sight of why I fell in love with technology in the first place. Looking back, I don't regret leaving Veltria. Losing that chapter was painful, but it was also necessary, because it forced me to find me. Not the man defined by a company's name or a title on a business card, but the man who shows up every day ready to learn, to teach, and to create with purpose. That's the legacy I'm proud of now. Not the lines of code running in some distant server room, but the impact I've made on real people's lives. The connections I've built, the stories I've shared. I'm Ethan Dre, and this is my story not of loss, but of rediscovery. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this, it's this. No matter where life takes you, your value isn't tied to one job or one company. It's in your resilience, your integrity, and the courage to keep building no matter what.